everyone, and welcome to the latest podcast from the Equality for Workers Union. Today we're going to be talking about fighting discrimination in the workplace. What you should gain from today, what you should learn from today, is your rights after maternity leave and dealing with discrimination and self-representation. Today I'd like to welcome Donna Patterson, who is a worker. I think he's still a worker here for Morrisons. Donna, I'm not 100% sure. And she's going to talk to us about her experience as regards to maternity leave and to returning to work. So, Donna, can you walk us through your journey at Morrisons from your pre-maternity roles to what changed on your return? Could you cover what were the first red flags that something wasn't right when you returned to work? And how did being told bluntly to get your head in the right place make you feel? Okay, so if you
Yeah,
could cover that, please.
yeah, of course. So I joined, or should I say, rejoined Morrisons in 2018. I had previously worked there as a buyer a number of years prior to that. So I rejoined after I'd had my first child, and I worked as a wholesale buying manager. Um, Even though I would have preferred part-time working, I actually joined 5 days a week because I knew it would be nearly impossible to get part-time working from day one. And yeah, worked on the wholesale side of the business and all went fine. I was approached by somebody in the organisation to join their team in a role that sounded really interesting and I was keen on doing. But in the middle of discussing that potential move, I actually found out that I was pregnant with my second child. And I just thought it was only fair to disclose that before agreeing to do the move. And as soon as that was mentioned, the role discussion just vanished. I didn't really kick up a fuss or escalate anything because I didn't want to appear to be difficult or a trouble causer. So I let it slide, um, remained in the role that I was doing, which I had actually managed to secure part-time hours. So I was working 4 days a week. And actually, just as I was going on maternity leave with my second child, um, it was the middle of the global pandemic, and the business announced a head office wide change of terms where they were reducing everybody's contract from 5 days to 4 days. And but not a huge amount of it because I was about to go on maternity leave and I just thought it was in a bridge I could cross at a later date. Um, Went on maternity leave, and initially things were fine. And out of the blue, I got a telephone call one day. I think the baby was maybe about 7 weeks old. And I answered the call, and it's somebody in HR. It's all very casual to begin with. How are you? How are things going? And then just discreetly kind of sliding in, just want to let you know, we've made a few changes to the team that you were in, but don't worry about it. It'll all be fine when you return. Once you've decided when you're going to return, don't worry. There will be a role here waiting for you. So I didn't think a huge amount of it. Alarm bells didn't really start ringing. I mean, my head was in a different place anyhow because I had this tiny newborn and a toddler. It was the middle of the pandemic. So I left it at that. And then a number of months later, I decided it was probably time to start reaching out, having conversations about my return from maternity. And somebody from HR basically got in touch to say their role had changed and there was a new point of contact. So I reached out to them, reached out to my line manager prior to mat leave, got no response from anyone. Kind of put it down to people are busy, everyone's got busy workloads, left it for about a week, followed up on email again, nothing, no reply from either person. So then I thought, right, okay, I know how busy things can be in retail. I messaged my line manager on text message and just said, I think there might be some IT issues because I'm not getting any replies to my emails. And she came back and said, oh, no, I've got your email. Leave it with me. I'll be in touch. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that I never then heard from that person ever again. They never got in touch with me again. Never got a reply to that email. I'd mentioned to a colleague that I was having issues. They had said how HR were really stretched and that I might be worthwhile contacting somebody else. They gave me the contact details for this other person. I contacted them. Eventually, they responded, had a conversation with them. Long story short, I was basically told that I couldn't go back to the team that I'd worked in previously. The roles had all been allocated to other people within that team I had previously worked in, and that I would be returning to the supermarket buying side of things, which historically I had been told could not be done in part time hours. And prior to maternity leave, I'd been working 4 days a week. But because of these contractual changes that they'd made, reducing everyone from 5 days to 4 days, that then meant my new contracted working hours equated to 3.5 days. So I already had reservations about how can the job be done in part-time hours when I'd previously been told there was no way it could be done in 4 days. So how was it going to be done in 3.5 days? But at the same time, I was really nervous about kicking up a fuss because I knew I was coming back to an organization that I'd been out of for nearly 12 months. Um, so I left it at that. There didn't seem to be a huge amount that I could do about the situation, and then returned to work where things just got progressively worse. But in terms of red flags, in hindsight, at the time, I didn't really acknowledge them as red flags, but there was loads. For example, a role disappearing as soon as you disclose you're pregnant, emails not being responded to, line manager cutting off communication, and when somebody's out of the organization, having been told informally on a phone call that there'd been a restructure done, and that their roles was potentially, up for question.
Were you aware of your rights at that time then, Donna?
I didn't have full awareness. No, I knew I knew that being on maternity leave, that there was certain things that employers had to do. I had for a long time been following the charity Pregnant Then Screwed, and I knew how much they spoke out about the rights of um, pregnant women and new mothers in the workplace. But I didn't know how much the law could have protected me at that point. There was also an element of I wanted to keep my job. I didn't want I just wanted to be able to return and for that to go smoothly as possible. And I absolutely would have had reservations about kicking up too much of a fuss and what the implications for that might have been had I have started quoting the law at that point.
Mm. Mm. Okay. And what about the third question there? Who actually said about get your head in the right place? I mean, that's sounds.
Oh, yeah, I can remember that was a conversation after I'd returned. Um, Within the first week, I was sitting down with my new line manager saying, "It's I am now very clear that this role that I've been put into is absolutely a full-time role. All of my predecessors have done it in full-time hours. So how can I possibly be expected to complete it in 3.5 days?" I was also at the same time trying really hard to fight to get that half day as a remote working from home day because it just made no sense logistically for me to be traveling back and forth to Bradford for half a day in the office. And I was just getting pushback and resistance on all fronts. Being kind of there was attempts to make it look like, there were compliments in regards to, you're really experienced, you've got so much experience as a buyer, you could do this with your eyes shut. It's an easy role, and the fact remained it was an unmanageable job that they had basically pushed me into. And so in a conversation with my new line manager, they at one point said, look, you just need to get your head in the right space, and you can do this. You can absolutely do this. As if I was choosing not to do it. So yeah, that's how that came about.
Do you think they were setting you up to fail?
I think it's really hard, even after going through a tribunal and everything that led up to it. I think it's really hard to work out who was thinking what. There's a bit of me that thinks that there was an expectation that I would just crack on, put the extra hours in that I wasn't being paid to do to get the job done, and and I just wasn't able to or willing to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, then how did the unfair treatment affect your mental health? Did it affect your mental health?
Oh yeah, it was huge. So I returned in August 2021, and by that Christmas period, I was at breaking point. I had been repeatedly having meetings with HR, with my line manager. I was documenting all the things that were being said in the meetings. I just kept flagging up. And my line manager absolutely knew how bad it was, because they were having to pick up loads of pieces of work that I just wasn't able to get to because of how unmanageable the workload was. And then on top of that, I had family life going on. My eldest was starting school. My youngest was just getting to grips with childcare and picking up every bug that was going. I remember at one point they both got chicken pox back to back. So essentially I had 4 weeks of that on top of the chaos that was kicking off at work. And I was alerting everyone that I could possibly alert at work that this is massively impacting me. And then as a result, I spoke to my GP, who signed me off with work related stress, um, which I then, once I went off with work related stress at the end of December, I actually never returned to work. Um, and at a later date, ended up resigning on the grounds of constructive dismissal.
And this was December 2024, yeah?
2021.
2021, okay, okay, yeah. Okay, what advice would you give to workers, who are feeling burnt out or stressed?
I would really urge them to make HR aware. I would urge them to make their line managers aware. I would make sure it's being documented and recorded. I would advise them to have a look at their policies. So, what does their employee handbook say about health and safety in the workplace? I would find out what support and resources that employer has in place for people that are struggling with mental health in the workplace. And I would keep pushing to make sure reasonable adjustments are being made and you are getting the support that you need. And if you're not, seek support from your GP. I was really lucky. I had a GP who, within minutes of talking to me, identified the issue was work. I would then also push, if you're considering returning to work, I would be pushing for occupational health to be getting involved, for an assessment to be done to make sure your employer has done a risk assessment to make sure that you going back to work isn't going to detriment your health anymore.
Yeah. And none of that was done then in your case?
So with mine, I was the one that was constantly having to push for it. So I was on this sick, um, signed off sick from the GP, and I was getting in touch with work to say what's going to be done. Who should be getting in touch with me to facilitate me being able to return to work? When is occupational health going to get involved? So I was the one that was pushing for that. I did get an assessment with occupational health, which I was really uh, suspicious of. I didn't trust that I would get a fair assessment, but much to my surprise, again, after a conversation with occupational health, they hit the nail on the head, which surprised me straight away. And they said, well, it's obvious. You need to be in a part time role that is part time appropriate based on the hours that you work. Um, and so that came as a relief. But again, that didn't really massively change the approach that was taken. Um, I had to push for conversations to happen off the back of that occupational health report.
Okay. What support? I know you said you got support from the your GP. Did you get any other support, any other help? And you
Um,
contacted that group that you mentioned at the beginning, yeah?
yeah, so Pregnant and Screwed were massively supportive. That they provide immense reassurance. They also, if applicable, can give you an hour's free call with a solicitor, an employment law solicitor, which after that happened, it really validated for me that I wasn't exaggerating, I wasn't making this up. It was genuinely happening, and it potentially had some legal grounds based on what I'd been able to disclose to them at that stage. Um, but in terms of work support, there was none. There was nothing.
Yeah, and you weren't a member of a trade union or anything, were you?
No, that I wasn't. And I, now when I think about it, it does seem bizarre. But having worked in Morrison's head office for all of the time that I worked for them, I never worked in store permanently, never worked in any of the depots permanently. My colleagues and I, who were based at the head office, there never was a conversation about trade unions or being part of a trade union. There always seemed to be this unspoken understanding that if you worked in store or if you worked in a depot, you were part of a trade union. But if you were in the head office, it just seemed like it was a no go.
Yeah, and you obviously didn't know your rights. You know, people don't know the rights, do they?
No, and it's one of the things I feel really strongly about, that when you begin working somewhere at any point in your life, as a teenager, when you can first start working, right up until the end of your working days, possibly, I truly believe that there's this, um, for many, not all, but for many, this understanding that the employer has more power and the employee should be grateful, and that there seems to be a lack of understanding that an employment contract works both ways, and actually the employee has just as much rights as the employer and should use those rights, but it's almost taboo to even talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in some legal cases they talk about master and servant. We know who they see as the master and who they see as the servant. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, completely that. And I think if you read a lot of employee handbooks, the tone of it is very much, you will do this and you will do that, and if you are caught this, then this will happen. But in actual fact, the employee has just in many ways has a lot of sway as well. But I think for a lot of people, and I believe, the education around it could be better from an early age at school all the way right until being a school leaver, I think there could be a lot more done to educate people about all the various laws, because there are loads of different laws that protect workers.
Yeah, and it's only till you're in the position that you were in that you find that out.
Absolutely, and at that point, you've got so much going on that it's really hard to get to grips with what legal protections there are for you, because you're in the middle of something really stressful.
Yeah, yeah. What was your experience of lodging a grievance then?
Um, I Based on my experience, I'm sure there will be exceptions, but based on my experience, I really struggle to see how an internal grievance process can ever come out in the employee's favour. Um, I struggle to understand how people that work for the same organisation as you are ever going to find against their own employer who are paying them their wage. So I don't understand how it's accepted and allowed that a grievance and then subsequently an appeal investigation is carried out internally. It seems to me that that should always be conducted by an external, impartial party, because the two colleagues that I encountered, who I'd never encountered in my life before, that conducted the initial grievance investigation and subsequently the appeal investigation, I can't see how they would ever have found in my favour, which
The
they, of
same
course,
people that did
didn't.
the same people that did the grievance also did the grievance appeal.
No, two different colleagues, two different levels, but both found that the employer did nothing wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So not a very good
And I
experience at all. Yeah,
Not a good experience, and I struggle to see how the outcome would be anything but what it was, um, because ultimately, if either the grievance manager or the appeal manager had have upheld a number of my issues, they would have essentially have been saying, "Oh, yes, you were treated discriminatively," which essentially then means that I how would I not win in an employment tribunal?
Hmm. So they didn't uphold any of your grievance, none of it.
So nothing was upheld at the grievance stage. At the appeal stage, there was a slight concession, and it was small, and all it was about was that they perhaps could communicate a little bit better, but that was it. It was only to do with communication.
So why do you think they dismissed your concerns?
I truly believe there's a multitude of reasons. I feel that um, when an organization operates in a very toxic way, it's impossible to even identify that the behaviors aren't acceptable and they are breaking the law, because they're just so commonplace and everybody behaves and is treated like that. So when you're just the one person complaining, you're the anomaly, not the organization. I also think there was an element of, we're too busy for this. We just need her to crack on and be quiet and just get the job done. Um, and yeah, I think the tribunal judge even found themselves that perhaps there was some ability lacking on the people that were involved, in that they didn't really understand what it was that they should have been doing at that time that they didn't do.
Yeah. So moving on to the tribunal, what made you represent yourself?
It wasn't a choice that I voluntarily made. It was kind of being backed into a corner. Um, so I have legal protection with our house insurers, And I didn't realise actually, but I did get the tip off through Pregnant Then Screwed that I could use that to protect me as a person. So I went through all the rigmarole of that, had 2 assessments done on my case. Both times the law firm calculated that I didn't have a strong enough chance of success in court, so therefore my legal insurance wouldn't protect me, wouldn't kick in. I explored no win, no fee, but I felt that the organisation I spoke to didn't really wasn't on the same wavelength as me. It seemed that all they wanted to do was to get to a settlement and to avoid court at all costs, because court is a big time investment. Um, and I wasn't up. I didn't have an appetite for that. And then ultimately, I couldn't afford to pay a solicitor anything from £300 to £500 an hour for an unknown number of hours. That was a huge cost to cough up. So it then left me with 2 options: drop the case or represent myself. And I decided, I was fortunate enough that I was able to have the time and the energy to put into doing the work that needed to be done to be able to represent myself.
Yeah. Uh, um, so how did you prepare? What resources helped you? You know, where did you go to get
Yeah.
the laws and what have you? Yeah.
Yeah, I did a huge amount of digging around, researching. Again, Pregnant and Screwed, the charity that helps me, are really good at shouting about other cases where people have been successful at tribunal. So I read all of them. They had a brilliant tribunal mentor service where they allocated you somebody else who had been through the tribunal process before themselves. Um, like I say, I read up past cases. I then started doing digging myself around other cases that had some sort of resemblance to mine. I attended um, my local tribunal as well to observe and just see how did it work, how does the respondent and the claimant um, speak to each other, how does the judge speak to them, what does it look like being in court. And I approached it like it was a job, preparing for my own case. So every day I would sit down, trawl through all my evidence, review all the documents that I had been sent or that I had sent then. And yeah, I treated it like a job.
Okay, I've got to say you've been very brave, Donna. You really have. Um, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just about to say it took its toll. It absolutely massively took its toll. So from me returning to work in that August 2021 until my final hearing in October 2022, that whole chunk of my life was consumed by either trying to resolve things at work or trying to navigate the tribunal system. And it was huge. I don't regret it at all for one single second, but I'm always very cautious to make people aware that it takes a physical, a mental, and emotional toll on you and your family as well.
Mm. And you've got two young children to look after as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Unbelievable. So the outcome and legal precedents, that's what we're going to look at now. So the tribunal found detriment of indirect sex discrimination. What does that mean for workers?
So in my case, it basically meant that as a woman who is a mother, based on statistical evidence and examples in society, that as a mother you carry more of the child caring responsibilities. So that as a result, I was treated less favourably than a man, for example, in the workplace. So by putting me into a role that had historically always been completed full time, when I had an established part-time contract, I had been treated unfavourably and as a result indirectly discriminated in doing that.
Yeah, yeah. What message do you think this ruling sends to employers?
I really, really hope it makes them pay attention and really question themselves on how they're treating people in the workplace, all people, but in particular parents, and that's mothers and fathers, because you know, for different reasons parents can be treated unfavorably. Men can be um laughed at for wanting to be and trying to take an active part in raising their own family, and women are treated either consciously or unconsciously worse in the workplace because they're seen as less committed to their job after becoming a mother. And I really hope that my case and other cases cause employers to really question that thinking that they've got in place.
And how did you feel after you'd won?
Um, I mean, massively emotional. It validated a lot of feelings that I'd had, that it was worth fighting for, that an impartial judge had seen and heard everything and decided that the law had been broken. So that there was, huge validation in that. But then also there was an element of, is this it? Because there was no, even despite the outcome, there was never an apology. And in actual fact, and I found this out through um, a newspaper article, not even from them. So there was a bit of press coverage after my case, and Morrisons were contacted for comment. And their comment, which, like I say, I found out in the news, not directly from them, was that I'm pretty sure the wording was something like, we believe the facts have been misrepresented and we're considering appeal. So in actual fact, they didn't ever hold their hands up and say, do you know what, we got this a bit wrong and we're sorry about that, and we're going to do better.
So, well, the next question then, what changed for you after the win?
I mean, lots changed. The trajectory of my entire career changed. I decided that I was never going to return to buying. That I wanted to try to help as many people, because there are so many people every single day that are treated unfavorably at work, and so many of them struggle to get the justice that they should get. So in that way, it massively changed. It also broke my trust in working and being a worker. It's taken a huge amount for me to restore my confidence and belief in an employer is can be good and isn't going to do to you what had historically been done to me. Yeah, so lots has changed.
Do you think anything's changed in regards to Morrisons?
I mean, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to know because I'm not there. I don't like to ask anyone that I do know that works there any questions that might compromise them or make them feel uncomfortable. But I know from things that they've issued and released that there appears to be, on a certain level, some changes. So I know that they. Or I'm led to believe from what they've shared that they organise sessions for, initially, it was just for mums, but I believe now they've included dads as well that are on any kind of family leave to come back into the office, bring their little ones in, have a welcome meeting. So it would appear that on a surface level, there have been some changes to make parents feel more welcome and included.
Okay. Could you tell us about the organisation that you've set up then to help others
Yeah, of
self-regulate?
course. So I set up Let's Talk Work because I found that throughout the whole process of preparing for my case, that although there's lots of information on the internet, there's obviously solicitors out there, and there's historic cases that you can read about. It's very hard to find people and speak to a regular everyday person that has been through it and can talk to you in everyday language. So I found with the tribunal system and interacting with solicitors, there's so much legal terminology and legal jargon that just doesn't make sense. Um, yeah, I'm struggling to remember some of the phrases now, but there was loads of phrases that I remember reading, thinking, "What's that even mean?" Um, uh, uh, Better particulars, for example. I remember receiving a request to provide better particulars. Just like, what does that mean? And I wanted to offer the knowledge that I'd spent over a year building up to other people so that they weren't starting from scratch like I was. I'm always really clear with people that I am not legally trained. I have no legal qualifications. However, I have gone through every single stage of the tribunal process right up to the final hearing and remedy hearing. And so I can provide insight and guidance of how to get yourself in the best place possible to feel as best prepared as you can for what is a really challenging, but not impossible, process to navigate.
And it's not theory. You've actually been through it practically. Yeah.
Yeah. I've done it. I've responded to barristers. I've answered solicitor letters. I've spoken to a judge face to face in person. I have navigated my way through the tribunal process, which I find in some ways laughable that it was designed for people, everyday people, to be able to represent themselves to get justice. And my experience of it is that it's not easy and it isn't accessible to everyone. And for me, that feels really unfair.
Yeah. But very well done. Very well done. What we've got now, Donna, is just a few questions. If you'd like to go through these just briefly. The first one is, what's one thing every woman returning from maternity leave should know? What should they know?
I think it's super important for you to know what your rights are. Be really clear on what your employer's maternity policy says, because quite often employers have these amazing policies, but they can't even follow them themselves. So you hold them to account. If their policy says XYZ, you say to HR, you say to your line manager, well, here it says this. And also reach out to the organisations that are out there. There are some brilliant ones. So I've mentioned Pregnant and Screwed, but there's also Working Families, there's Maternity Action, and there's a new thing that's popped up called Pregnant Then Protected. So between all of them, there's huge amounts of resources. And I would just encourage people to access them and familiarise themselves with what protections they've got.
And I think they'll find things on there. I don't know if you use the TUC site.
Well, because I wasn't a member, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to use them or not.
Yeah, there's free information there on that site. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of useful advice there and sites that they can use. The next one is, what rights do employees have if their role changes after maternity leave? I know you said you're not trained legally, in employment law, and some of these you'd feel a bit uncomfortable answering. So I've put one or two things in there. I'll just go through these, yeah.
Yeah.
And what I've found is employees returning from maternity leave have the right to return to the same job under the same terms and conditions, unless it's not reasonably practicable. If the original role is no longer available, the employer must offer a suitable alternative with at least the same pay and the same conditions. Yeah. And the next one, again, this is a legal question. Can your boss change your hours and expect you to accept it? No, a boss cannot unilaterally change a pregnant employees' work hours and expect them to accept it. They've got to consult with you. While employers can make reasonable adjustments to a pregnant employee's working conditions to remove risks, they cannot change fundamental aspects of the employment contract, like hours, without your agreement, without consultation. If a doctor or midwife confirms that a change in hours is necessary for health and safety, the employer must offer suitable alternative arrangements, but the employee doesn't have to agree to any changes that they find unacceptable. Okay. There's a few more questions then, Donna, which I think you're comfortable with. What should someone do today if they're being treated unfairly at work?
I would say document everything. Keep a record of everything, because if you ever have to take things formal, even if you don't want to, like I did, you've got all that backlog of evidence there. So you keep a record of your conversations, remember when phone calls happened, remember when meetings happened. If meeting minutes get circulated after a meeting, make sure you read them and you contest them if they do not reflect what was discussed. Because if you don't, there's a risk that that person's version of events could be taken as the accurate version. And yeah, documenting things is hugely important, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. How do you know if if you're being gaslighted at work?
Well, I think the problem is you don't necessarily realise to begin with, and I certainly found that. Um, even from the initial, just get your head down and crack on, or you're really experienced, or you can definitely do this. Um, there's loads of things that can be put out there as a positive compliment, but they're absolutely not. So I would say for me, it was speaking to friends or speaking to other colleagues or reading other people's successful tribunal claims, and there being similarities to what was going on for me, really made me pay attention and think, no, this no, I don't care what they're saying to me. There's something not right here.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say to someone, if they're scared to speak up at work?
I would say try to find someone you can trust at work to talk about it, or if you haven't got anyone at work, find someone outside of work that's really trustworthy. You can have a conversation to reach out to organizations out there. So, like you've mentioned, if you're a union member, reach out to your union. Or you can reach out to voluntary organizations. So I've mentioned some charities that exist. So if you're pregnant, then you're free to reach out to them. Or if it's another protected characteristics, for example, disability or religion, there are other organizations that are out there that exist to help people that are having issues at work. But I would say, yeah, reach out, and then find the courage to speak up about it. And if you keep getting ignored or dismissed, just keep escalating up the levels until somebody pays attention. And if you can, I was really lucky. Not every work colleague will want to or agree to do this, but I had a really great colleague who came in and sat in meetings with me and was a note taker and just was a real moral support. And that really helped me in those difficult meetings I was having.
Yeah, and I think the thing they said there, join a union as well, as soon as possible. I mean, you insure your car, you insure your house, you insure your life. Why not insure your job? Yeah. Okay, the final question then, Donna. If you're in this situation right now, this is what you need to hear. What should somebody hear? What would you think they should hear?
That you're not alone, that you're not making this up. Sadly, it will have happened to somebody else before, and that there are ways to do things about it. And they don't always have to result in going to court either. Some employers do see sense, and things. I have spoken to people who have actually challenged their employer, and being able to remain working for that employer because things got resolved and sorted out. It doesn't have to end the way it did for me. And I know that not everyone will want it to end like that. Not everyone wants to go to court. And I just want people to know that by speaking up and challenging at work, it doesn't have to cost you your career, and we shouldn't all live in fear and not speaking up about things, on the chance that, we might lose our jobs.
Yeah. Okay, Donna, thank you very much for joining us today. You're a very brave person, and I hope to see you again in the future. And good luck to for the future. Okay.
Thanks so much. It's been lovely having a chat with you.
Right, well, thanks again to Donna for joining us today. It was a real interesting chat, and we'll have many more podcasts in the future.